Yeah, I'm so excited. Wow is a reminder why it's wow, because I feel like I miss more wow effect in life. I want people to feel like, wow, we can do that. Wow, it's possible. Wow, life is brilliant. So we are one as well, because we are essentially one. We live in one place. It's a one home that we have, and we can't escape that. We might not like each other sometimes, but we're here together. So I feel like we are one is to be able to embrace that sort of feel. And the intention is really to have people here that can inspire one another and give some hope to one another in the way that we live together, basically. It's unedited, really raw, authentic. You know, you can freak up sometimes, and it's also fine, because vulnerability is what's important as well. And I'm excited because I have Raf Manji from the Opportunity Party. And I read some of the policies of the party, and I feel like, I wish we can see changes in some of the aspects in our lives in New Zealand at the moment. But the first thing I kind of want to delve into it, how you live your life in being a politician. Do you know what I mean? To me, it's like so hard meeting all these people. How do you keep yourself kind of, one, not only motivated to that, but feeling like with integrity and love and care for these things, and put up with all sorts of people, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. And the politician's life, as we see, people often start off quite open, and then they slowly retreat, so that you actually never really see them in public, and everything is highly controlled. And I think, the experience I've had as a local politician, so I was a city councillor in Christchurch for 6 years, and that's a very different experience to a national level politician, because, you live in your community. So you're out and about all the time. You're at the supermarket, people see you, and you can't hide away. Whereas actually at the national level, MPs can hide away. Like, they can spend a lot of their time in Wellington. They don't have to be out in the community, though it certainly helps them if they want to get re-elected at some time. I just think you've got to be yourself. And I try and, look, I'm always open to talking to people. And you always see people sort of, double check you, and it's like, oh, is that so-and-so, or is that you? Just being up here in Auckland, out and about in town, I bumped into probably 4 or 5 people that I knew from Christchurch. So it's a small country.
Yeah.
And I think, you just have to try and retain some of your kind of, normal life, and go about things, walk down the street, not worry that people might kind of know you. And, of course, you could wear a mask these days, which is quite handy.
It's also easy, right?
Yeah, but I think the problem we have in politics is when our politicians become removed from the society that they're part of, and they just hang out in those kind of institutional spaces like Parliament, and, whether it's Wellington or Washington or London or wherever, and you lose touch. They lose touch with people. And it's very, very difficult, because the stresses these days are huge. The issues around personal safety are also a big issue, particularly for women. And I think it's not easy, but I mean, for me, I'm not going to change the way that I live. And I still like to go to my local cafes and go for a walk down the road and go to the beach. And it's quite funny, down in Wellington, I'm often down at the beach, certainly in the sort of warmer months. And people sometimes come up to you and go, oh, are you so-and-so? And you're there in your kind of swimming trunks or whatever. And it's like, have a chat, whatever. And you're like everyone else. You're carrying different responsibilities, and people have asked you for whatever reason to represent them, even though sometimes there's such a big gap between, if you like, the vote, please represent us, and actually the engagement that you have as a politician. So I try and keep things real. I'm a pretty straight talker. I'm not into bullshit, which is probably why I'm not in the main parties, So I've always been seen as
That's a great point.
Slightly maverick. But it's not as much maverick. It's just trying to be honest about stuff. People don't always like honesty. Sometimes we actually prefer to be not told the exact truth, because it's too painful in some respects. So, it's
we think that we're doing the best for others by not telling the truth as well, which a lot of times happen as well in politics, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's that old kind of thing, you kind of stand for something or fall for anything, So I'd much prefer to stand for nothing, and if people don't like it, fine. And if people don't want to support it, fine. I don't have a problem with that. But, you know, I like to spend a bit of time explaining to people why that is the case. And sometimes it takes a long time for people to change a position because we're so fixed. And when we create all these walls around ourselves, we create all these stories to justify the position that we might want to hold because it makes us feel safe. And we have to understand that. That's the human condition. You know, so often activists might think, well, why aren't we doing this? Isn't this really kind of obvious? It's like, well, actually, no, it's not, because you have all these other barriers, the psychological barriers, emotional barriers that a lot of people create just to get through the day.
Totally, on emotional level, for sure. You spoke about the gap between government institutions and the people, basically. And I feel it's been growing for decades. It's not new. But the last couple of years, potentially, it's been just like magnified. And seem to be really getting to a space in which the distance, that gap, is the biggest gap that we've ever had. How can we restore something to be different, to be more humane, to be more like actually we represent these people, regardless if you voted for me or not. We part of the community, rather than necessarily I am in power, I am the power, I don't need to be accountable, I can lie, I can be kind of saying, how can we restore something like that to become a bit more holistic? Is it possible to have a holistic approach in politics?
Look, in a way, I'd say it's a struggle. So when I think of some of the conversations I've had over, let's say, the last 25 years, which was kind of covers my, let's say, awakening, participatory democracy, citizens' assemblies, holistic approaches to decision making. Now, they often sound good, but they aren't always the answer either, because sometimes you've got to make a decision.
Yeah.
And I think one of our problems is, yes, I think we actually have a crisis in governance at the moment. All our institutions are starting to fail. That causes a loss of trust. And when you have a loss of trust in society, everything else starts to fall away. And you start to see more crime. You see more social dysfunction, and that's why we're talking about social cohesion at the moment. Of course, the policies to deal with that are nowhere near the main table, and we can obviously talk about that. But I think it's decision-making is a real challenge. So I think one of the reasons we're seeing more, let's say, authoritarian systems springing up and a desire for someone to take charge. Now, whether it's a Trump, which is in a way trying to destroy any vestige of human-centered systems, or those guys, because they're always guys, who see themselves as returning to civilizational states, whether it's Putin thinking he's Peter the Great, or Xi thinking, well, China's, 5,000-year civilization, or Modi in India. They're appealing to a time where there was certainty. So people lose trust, the world is uncertain, they turn. And because they don't have the ability to make decisions amongst themselves, they much prefer somebody to say, I'm going to make the decision.
For you, yeah.
For you. So this is where kind of local is important and community is important. Is how do we create, as you said before, intentional communities. Communities where people have a say, where people get together and make decisions. I remember, looking at some of the outcomes of Occupy, particularly down in Wall Street, 2010, 2011. And it's actually a lot harder than it looks. So it sounds good. Let's all get around together and we'll all have a say and then we'll slowly evolve to a decision. It's not always that straightforward. Then if we look at, let's say, a Westminster-style governance system, which is, sprung up over the last 300-400 years, where you have a civil or public service that carries out the wishes of an elected government made up of elected representatives who, have had a conversation with the public to say, hey, this is what we want to do. Then we get into a parliament, we create a government, and then we issue instructions to the public service, say, how do we do X, Y, and Z? That's kind of how people think it works. Now, in reality, that system is also struggling because we're humans and power is underlying all of those issues. So we tend to actually, even in a democracy like New Zealand, it's essentially three or four people run everything. So the kitchen cabinet, let's say, which is 3 to 5 people, they make all the decisions, and everyone else is there kind of for window dressing in some respects. And the public services has become, let's say, somewhat flexible in responding to what their ministers might have to say to them, as opposed to providing really clear advice on, well, if you'd like to do this, we think this is the best way to do it. And we have underneath that this sense of constant consultation, which doesn't always lead to anything. So, so people are very confused about the systems of decision making, and that creates, an overall sense that, oh, crikey, do we trust what we're being told? And once that gets into the system, then you have a real problem, because that in itself is it leads to a decline in people's belief that actually there is some kind of coherent system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a worry. So I don't think there is a perfect answer, because we're human beings. And human beings are
complex.
We are complex, but I think a sense of transparency and clarity, and I think my experience of being in local government, particularly in that post-earthquake situation, the 15th of March terror attack, which I was quite involved in, the response to that, is that the transparency is not always there.
No.
And if you're honest with people and you say there is some kind of accountability, I'd much rather take the approach that, okay, I say this is what I'm going to try and do, and if I don't do it or I don't do it well, then I'm out of here. There's got to be some sense of accountability, but there is no accountability. So that suggests that, politicians can make decisions and they may have long-lasting effects, but they won't be around to bear the impact. So if we kind of say, oh, well, we have the ability to vote people in and out, that's the one sanction that we have.
But it's also every 3 years, right? So within this time, many things can happen. People forget a lot of things as well, and then we revert back to the same sort of place that we were before. So the governance institutions, the way it runs even, needs to change. For example, in Switzerland, in the pandemic, they actually asked people in a quick referendum, because these days with technology, you don't need to go to put a paper. And you can ask people actually, hey, do you want to go on lockdown? Yeah, you can put it up. Yeah, nice. And most people, yes, wanted or not wanted. So how we can bring more discussion, more involvement of communities in decision making, rather than, oh, you elected me, so I'm actually make the decision now, because we know that people can change, and we know that people sometimes often not necessarily getting the right consultation as well, and they're sometimes influenced by interests. It's unfortunate, but it's part of life as well as a human conditioning. So if we have more, is there a way to bring governance in which it's more like a council? It's more like using a collective wisdom rather than an expert wisdom, because also, what does that mean, an expert? We saw a massive debates of experts of what's right or what's wrong. So you can't take it for granted as well, right?
It's very difficult, because how do you, the Swiss model, it's a cultural thing as well. So sometimes when we look at other countries and we think, oh, why don't we do that? It's because culturally we're not the same, so we're not thinking the same. So the Swiss have had the canton model for a very, very long time, and I think this is the classic case of the West, particularly the US, kind of trying to export democracy. It's crazy. No one's buying it. That's the problem. So you try and export democracy to the Middle East. Well, they're not interested in it, because culturally it doesn't work. What you're actually trying to export is peace, less conflict. That's a different conversation.
Exactly.
And so constantly trying to sort of change regimes is probably not the best approach. And I guess our experience shows us that's not the case. Trying to make liberal societies more liberal and more people-centered, that's a different approach altogether, because that means you come at it in a different way, not in a way of kind of military power. So that is a challenge. I think one thing
Creating democracy with war, it's a bit of a paradox, is it?
It's just
Do you know what I mean? Hey, I want to influence freedom to you by killing first of all of you, and then you're going to embrace democracy.
It's nonsense. I mean, it's actually quite crazy that, and of course, a lot of this goes back to kind of the Cold War and the sort of the arm wrestles over the best sort of model. But if you think about it, if you think about sort of the Cold War, a lot of the drivers for the change, particularly in places like East Germany, were cultural factors. It was actually just people saying, hey, I want to listen to music and I want to read stuff. And if you speak to some East Germans now, they don't necessarily think the merger with West Germany was fantastic, because they think, well, there were some things in East Germany that we kind of liked, like community, definitely. But yeah, we didn't like a lot of the restrictions and the secret police and things like that. But we had a kind of slightly different approach to living, and we don't completely buy into the model that you've given us, but sure, we're happy that we've got more freedom. And so that's a kind of slightly different approach. So in a way, trying to bring in more liberal values in terms of freedom to think and be with people and explore things, as opposed to essentially a financial, military, industrial structure, which is a different beast altogether, with democracy kind of on the top of it.
Packet as democracy.
Yeah, and of course that's kind of the US model. We know how that works.
Yeah.
And we're not that excited about it, because look at the state of the US. Still a massive economy and very powerful, but socially completely split, completely polarized. And it's quite, it's not great to look at. So I think we've got to be quite careful. And I think, again, at the local level, it's like, what decision rights do people want to have? So they want to have decision rights on what happens in their local community. But do they care about, who's delivering the water? Not really. They want to know they've got clean water, and that when they flush the loo, something happens, and that when there's flooding, the water goes away properly and all the rest of it. But if you say to them, would you like a new library, or would you like a swimming pool, or where do you want this thing to be, or would you like a new community playground? That's of more interest. Or actually in New Zealand, it's like car parking or tree. I want to cut this tree down. But the broader stuff, what I call like hygiene factors, are, well, yes, we want good roads and we want good transport and we want the basics done well, and we're happy for a centralized system to deliver it. It's a bit more efficient. But yeah, what are people really interested in that affects them on a day-to-day basis? We know that people need to be safe. You need to be safe in your home, and you need to be safe in your community. You need to have the basics of life, which means you need to be able to shelter yourself and feed yourself and your family. And you want to be able to do something with your life, whatever that is. And I'm not saying you want to have a job. It's like you want to do something with your life.
Nice. It's a big difference, right?
It's a big difference. And we know, with technology, automation, AI, VR, we know stuff is coming. And is this the time where we look at work in a very different way? And I mean, I think when I did my TEDx talk in 2016, I then was invited to talk in Spain, actually, at a social services conference for the EU. And I said, we need to kind of separate work and income.
Totally.
Because that's where we're stuck. We're stuck with this idea that to eat, you need to work, as opposed to make a contribution.
It's an old-fashioned 10,000 years mentality that we carry, right? Since ever, of emperors, queens, kings, prime ministers, presidents, in slavery, all of that basically. If even in the Bible and all these things, there is like, you need to work hard to create, to bring bread to your home. Yeah. And it was maybe valid when we had scares in the world and we had to produce stuff. And nowadays, technology allows us to actually evolve, to think differently and to consume less as well. Yeah,
but I mean, it should do, but our system is still the same. So, and in fact, the message that we're telling young people, what the message we've told people is, go to school, learn, study hard, and then when you leave school, work hard, and then everything else follows. Yeah. But now we have this huge group called the working poor. So many people are working non-stop. So many people are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're in this kind of gig economy, and they can barely make ends meet. So, and that is because, at a fundamental level, all of our wealth is tied up in housing, and land price increases, and wages are modest, and everyone's sitting around going, oh, we can't really afford this. This system doesn't work. But if you are a landowner, and it sounds like a sort of 17th century story, you're doing really well.
Yeah.
Like, you're at Versailles or something. So, you read in the newspapers here, the front page of the Herald, we're living in fear, of crime. And then the next page is, look at the numbers of suburbs with $5 million homes in. Now, if you're earning like $50,000 a year, you're going, what? What world am I living in? So none of this stuff makes any sense anymore. And the politicians are just, they're impervious to addressing that issue. So, the Prime Minister might go, oh, yes, my nuclear-free moment, or whatever the performative stunt of the day is. I'm going to solve child poverty and etc. Well, you need to understand the system that is generating those
child
outcomes,
poverty.
And if you go around saying, oh, there's no way, I'm never going to raise taxes. It's like, well, you might as well leave now. There's the door, because you're wasting your time. And that the message that she is sending by saying that is, I'm not going to touch the current system. So all of you people who are doing really well and getting wealthier and wealthier, you're cool, you're fine. I'll still fiddle around at the bottom and try and say, oh, I've kind of brought...
Move from here to there.
Yeah, I've brought 30,000 people out of poverty. That's great. But the system, we're going to leave the system as it is, because, you're going to vote for me.
Yeah.
And that for me is the accountability bit. And that's the bit for me which really sticks in my throat. It's just a lack of integrity there, So it's kind of stand for something. If it's just about getting re-elected, you're wasting your time, So I think that's why I'm here, because I'm kind of really sick of that. And if we don't make fundamental change, this is going to continue, and our society will become more and more dysfunctional, and it will split.
I feel it's already happening in New Zealand as well.
You can see it,
dysfunctional society, living in fear and separation. It has many layers to it. It's not one single thing, of course. It's something that it's been accumulating over the years as well. But I agree with you. It's something to do with the system. And I feel like whenever we're trying to make a change and we bring the same habits of whatever we've done in the past, new can't come as a result of it. Even building new economy, it's hard to do that in the same principles of the old one. It's going to be the same. So I feel like, can we reimagine stuff? Can we reimagine these concepts? There are concepts that we live by, right? Whether it's economy, religion, cultural, they're concepts that are beautiful in our minds, and they become valid because we believe in them wholeheartedly. Can we reimagine that?
Look, of course, yes. Because imagination is always a yes, you can. And I probably, 25 years ago, I probably thought, we can do things a bit differently. Different approaches to things, a different focus on the outcomes that we want as human beings. But unfortunately, the underlying system is so powerful. And I mean that in a physics sense. The gravity is just too strong. So yes, you can set up an intentional community. And there are communities all over the world trying to do things a little bit differently. Sometimes they struggle to keep going because you need open energy. And sometimes if a system is closed, over time the energy dissipates. And that's always been the problem with, let's say, local currency systems or something. You need energy in that system. But for me, I just think if we don't change the underlying system, it's always going to be a struggle. Now, of course, the system could collapse. And we saw in the global financial crisis, it very nearly did. We see in Europe now that those financial pressures and issues that they didn't deal with are still present and causing potential problems. But, there's too many interests with huge power. Just look at the fossil fuel industry. We have it in our power to essentially say, okay, we're only going to produce X, barrels of oil a year, let's just say, as an equivalent, because that will match the emissions profile we need, and we'll work out normally how that gets distributed and paid for, and that will be the incentive to shift the system. But they're just not interested in doing it. I have a massive war in Ukraine where they're burning huge amounts of fossil fuels. I mean, all wars ultimately are based on fossil fuels because you need energy
Resources
to move things around. And countries who are thinking, actually, we might benefit from climate change. So the Russian might go, hey, well, Siberia might open up. We might be able to farm there, And, hey, China, can we borrow 100 million people to farm that? That's how they're thinking, because they're thinking in power terms. And so I think it's very easy for us to think, oh, well, maybe people will change. But it takes time, and often history shows us that we tend not to have very smooth transitions.
So you mean it needs to be destructive, then have a transition towards
Yeah,
something.
I'd prefer not. And I think that the advantage we have here in New Zealand is we can do things differently.
That's right.
We've got everything. I mean, look out the window here. It's beautiful. And everyone, we're at the Pura
By the
retreat.
way, four weathers in one day, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's like now the sun's shining, it's been hailing. But New Zealand has the ability, we have the resources because we have water, we have land, we can produce food, we can do things sustainably. The rest of the world, I don't know. I see a lot of pain and conflict coming there, and which is why I'm frustrated in a way, because Prime Minister has a great, international, perspective. People love her and everything, but she doesn't do that stuff at home. But we could be doing cool stuff here.
That's right.
100% pure.
I feel there is a lot more concerns of how we look for the outside world in an image rather than actual in action. And I think I shared with you before as well, I feel really motivated to be in New Zealand, unlike 2 or 3 years ago, because I feel New Zealand can actually lead by example. We have really, as you said, the right infrastructure, resources, not too many people, we isolated, not so many conflicts with the outer world. And yeah, sure, there is conflict between people because this is life. But there is a great potential in New Zealand, and I feel we are so removed from that potential. We just don't show up to it. And whether it's, Prime Minister goes on gigs in the US and everyone loves her over there, but here, man, she's in a very fragile situation because she earned it as well. And I feel how we can bring us Kiwis here in New Zealand to really believe in ourselves, that we can actually create something incredible. We can adopt anything we like here and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it. And if you guys want to look at it and embrace that as well anywhere else, brilliant, do it. So I mean, like when you talked about fossil fuel, right? We can end it up in a day. There is no interest. We talked about climate change. So one of the top policies is how we address that. And then when you check one of the biggest polluters in New Zealand, the dairy farming, whether it's the drinking water that we drink, it's because of that, fertilizing the land, then the produce we buy is a lot less with nutrients because of that as well. So really, we're not feeding ourselves really good food. Even if you buy the cucumber from the supermarket, it's possibly less likely to have the amount of nutrients that you actually need to have than something organic or not too fertilized on the ground. So, and then when you check it, as you said, they just don't feel that they want to make that change because currently generate this income. The train needs to keep going. How can we hold off this train for a second and tell it, hey, have a break, train. Look, go and have coffee, matcha, turmeric latte, and we're going to start doing something slightly different. So for me, when I check how these organizations often really control decision-making by lobbying, by, I won't say bribing, but it happens. I don't know where, but also in New Zealand maybe, but elsewhere as well, I guarantee it happens because I know that for my country, in Israel currently, I'm from Israel originally, there is parliament right now with 11 members in the current parliament. They've been to jail in the past. No, I'm not joking, seriously, for getting bribes.
Yep.
And they got re-elected. I mean, like, seriously. Now, New Zealand is the same in a different package. I don't know of many stories here, but I know it happens. And I know lobbying is everywhere. We know who controls the stuff. How can we hold these people accountable and tell them, hey, you need to work with all of us, not only with your agenda of profit and whatever that is.
Yeah.
So is it possible?
I believe it is possible, but it's difficult. You're right. I mean, there are lobbyists on both sides of the house. They're deeply embedded in the systems. Some of the big markets still hold a lot of power and sway. And, you know, I mean, New Zealand's always like number one in kind of the least corrupt nations from Transparency International. But, you know, you could say even that process is a bit dodgy. There's a lot of cronyism here. There's a lot of nepotism. And we just do it in a slightly different way in New Zealand. It's not outright financial corruption, which we see in a lot of places. But it's, you know, our system could do with a bit of cleaning. There's no doubt about that. And the transparency around, you know, who's making what decisions, who's getting in to see somebody, who's in somebody's ear. And I think one of the problems is that because the politicians are not clear about what it is they're standing for, it means they're amenable to a lot of changes. So when people say to me, okay, well, what's your bottom line if you get into a position of influence in Parliament? I'll say, well, we need tax reform. We're going to have a universal basic income. That is just the base, you know, that it's that or nothing. And we are going to tax land, and we're going to remove all the tax loopholes. That's critical, because if we don't do that, nothing else is going to change. People need higher incomes, and the wealthy need to pay more tax, and big companies need to pay more tax, and trusts need to pay tax at the same level. So there's none of this dancing around, because our tax system is corrupted.
Totally.
End of story. And so I would say that's what we're about. And people go, oh, well, no one's going to vote for that, or you're not going to get in. Okay, well, whatever. I think people will. And yes, we've got, you know, work to do to talk to people about that. But as someone who's been around, you know, finance, economics, politics for, 35 years, this is the most important structural shift we can make. We still have a lot of work to do on human stuff, but I don't think we can talk about the human stuff and repair that long-term emotional damage until people feel that they can feed themselves, that they have economic... It's the
basic needs, right?
Yes, financial security. So in a way, financial instability and insecurity is terrible for people's mental health, you know? I mean, and COVID exposed that. I mean, all those kids who actually had not gone back to school or back to uni because they're at home or they're taking extra shifts to support their families. And yet people are going, oh, you know, I've put in a new swimming pool or bought a new boat because they've got so much money. So it's not their fault. It's just that's the way the system is structured. You know, so if we don't change that, we're just going to keep going along until people get to the point where we go, why is there so much crime? Why is, you know, all this dysfunction happening? Well, these people have got nothing going for them, nothing to live for. They've got no money. They're stuffed. They're out of society. So,
and if they want to get a bit of money, it goes to a very difficult process that does almost shaming to someone to go and get $200 a week.
Let me give you an example. So I met a couple the other day, and, you know, this is, I'll tell you the sort of the high level. Anyway, so they got married, young people. She lost her allowance because she got married. It's like, what? What's the relationship status got to do with anything? And then she's at Wins saying, well, we weren't married before, and this was our financial position. Now we're married. You're telling me I'm worse off. Oh, well, you should rely on your partner. It's like, what century are we in? And then the woman at Wins says, well, why don't you have a baby? It's like, what kind of weird stuff is this? You know, we have a punitive system.
Yeah.
There's no dignity in that. And you're telling me that people's relationships impact on the kind of the income support that they get? Well, let's get rid of all of that stuff. Let's get rid of it. I don't know if anyone listening saw the Netflix show Made, which was about this woman. It was an American show, woman who in a relationship, kind of slightly abusive, decided to leave with her young daughter and got stuck in this kind of endless cycle of, you don't have a job, so you can't get a house. You don't have a house, so you can't get daycare for your kid.
Right.
You can't get a job because you need daycare for your kid. And you're just going round and round in circles. And all these convoluted systems set up. So for me, you know, that basic income is a powerful tool to provide financial security. It has huge impacts for women. which, you know, we don't talk about much, but is really critical. If you don't have that, you can't do anything. So
Absolutely.
It's not like somebody doesn't want to work or doesn't want to do something or doesn't want to kind of have somewhere to live. The system is totally structured against that and pretends that everyone is living in this neat nuclear family that has a kind of a nice job and can afford to service a mortgage or pay the rent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not the situation.
And I like what you said before, because it is more like, what do you want to do with your life rather than what do you want to do for work? And it's two different things, because work is changing. What people want to do with their life, most people have a sense of purpose. Most of us want to be fulfilled. Most of us want to be acknowledged. Most of us want to be loved. This is an innate of every human being. And I feel we take for granted that humans are just these individuals, that everyone wants to be the best. But we are social creatures. We seek that sort of acknowledgement. We seek that connection, right? More than anything. Family, loved ones. It might seem a bit separated at the moment. And I feel universal basic income, it's these basic needs that needs to be provided for people to even be in a space to look after their mental well-being, or to look after one another, or to make sure that they're not consuming as much as they can, basically. And I feel these basic needs has to change. But I also feel that what's the source for it, where it's coming from, that goes back to the fundamental system itself. I mean, like, you know, we can actually imagine all sorts of new systems. We can imagine a new digital currency that doesn't even relate to the current paradigm, and call it anything we like, and have it against birthright of every human to have basic needs, and use that. And then we don't have a centralized power of a bank tells you, oh no, it's actually, I won't approve that anymore, or I'm shutting down in your country. Who knows, right?
Yeah, I mean, all of that stuff is possible. And I think, you know, the point you make about the imagination stuff, actually, what does the future look like? So at the moment, there is no imagination for a future. So if in a kind of Maslowian terms, how are we going up that self-actualization when most people can't do they don't have the shelter or the food or the safety or security? And so governments are kind of stuck in this essentially, 17th, 18th century mechanistic production consumption cycle. And actually, is that the future? Now, I'm not saying we're all going to sit around meditating and all the rest of it, nice candles. We still need to do things. But there is no imagination as to what that might be. So if we don't see people as having the ability to be free to choose the life they want to lead, and therefore you can say the amount of effort they put into that might determine their ability to consume. But are we just going to all aim to have bigger boats, bigger houses? You know, we know resource-wise that there's a limit to that consumption, however efficient we get. And actually, a lot of people be thinking, okay, well, what now? What do I want for my kids? What is the world going to look like in 2070? It's going to be very different. And if we don't have any imagination for where we would like society to go, without particularly saying this is what people have to do, but giving people the freedom to be more human and to be less captured by a kind of, you know, industrial production system where we know for a lot of people they have enough, plenty. I have enough. I mean, I've been actually just trying to strip my life back in terms of the amount of stuff I have, making sure that actually if I'm buying something, it's good quality. And I don't really need things. I'm constantly like getting rid of stuff. And then I'll come back and go, oh, I need to get rid of more stuff until I kind of think I have what I need to support me in my life and do the things I like doing. I like reading. I like walking. I like thinking. I like swimming, you know? I like hanging out with people. These are quite simple things. They don't cost huge amounts of money. And I think we have kind of sucked up so much of our resource and in a way so much of the technological bounty in the ability to be really efficient in producing goods and services and put it really into the wrong places, which is essentially this piece of land here. I could say, well, that's worth $1,000 or it's worth $5 million. But that distorts our whole system because then the whole capital system is based on this instead of people. And that's ultimately the fundamental problem. But I think if we talk more, like if you said to the Prime Minister, what's your, what do you see society being like? What's your vision? Like a lot of people say to me, no one's got any vision. It's just all kind of small incremental steps that we want to do this, we want to do that. But where do you think we're going? I think it's
idea, man.
I think it's quite a useful conversation.
Absolutely. I wonder actually what would be the answer for it.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I it's like I want at the community level, whatever type of community you live in, a place where you feel safe. Kids can go and run around outside. They've got places to play, whether it's a playground or a forest or a park or whatever, that people have access to, the basic things they need to live. And we're not kind of stuck in this endless cycle of doing a whole bunch of stuff just to barely survive when that stuff is not really adding a lot of value. So, 20 years ago when I left the financial markets, I started working in a startup called True Cost. And we were looking at, what is the true cost of our production system? So if we actually price that into, the cost of goods and services, people would change their behavior because people do respond to price incentives. And then we might be able to realign the system where people would say, oh my God, that's actually really expensive because now suddenly we're paying for the fact that is causing pollution or that is causing a loss of water quality, soil quality, air quality, modern slavery, so labor side of things. And actually we want to eat stuff that is produced well and we want to pay that the proper price for it. And, it's people can sort of say, oh, it's all a bit utopian and all the rest of it. It's not. It's actually it's quite ordinary. Society doesn't have to completely stop what it's doing. You can still play football, play rugby.
Absolutely.
And, humans love that. We can have more arts and culture. We
can actually have more time for all of these things that people love doing the most, right?
Yeah,
spend
absolutely.
time with family and friends. Yeah. And, ultimately, as you said, the bigger house, bigger boat, bigger car, that's not what most people are going to remember in their life in the last possibly moments because they're going to just reflect upon the relationships they had. At least that's a documentary that was really beautiful.
Well, look, I mean, you're right. I've just been, I've been in Spain with my parents. My father has just gone into a nursing home. And I just can't, even being back here, it's like I'm thinking, oh God, should I be there with him? It was like, I haven't spent a lot of time with him in the last 20 years, but it was a really profound time having a couple of weeks with him in this nursing home. And it was like, this is the real stuff that matters. Like you say, we're not talking about what did you do in your life or how much money you had or whatever. It was a very kind of personal experience. And I think that, it's like, what is important to you? What is the stuff that makes us feel good?
I feel it's similar to many people.
Yeah.
I feel, it's really similar to most people is these things. We are social creatures, we care about, as you said, 20 years went by and now I'm with my dad in a nursing home. Should I spend more time with him? Because who knows?
I'm thinking, this is because this actually sort of matters to me when I'm in 10 years time and, and he's passed and I think back, okay, I missed out on that kind of like last 3 weeks. What difference has it made in the rest of my life? So I mean, these kind of questions. I mean, a friend of mine I had made in the late 90s, Jorik Blumenfeld, a Dutch guy. I think his father was one of the Dadaist founders, and he wrote this book called A Utopia 2099. And he actually thought, right, I'm going to imagine a future, but in a practical sense, not so much a sci-fi sense. So he sort of went forward 100 years to see what society could look like. And he had basically two different scenarios. One was a village in Norfolk in the UK, but it could be a village here in Albany. And the other was an American system, which was like a Blade Runner, post-industrial, all dark, acid rain, and all the rest of it. And had journalists kind of basically spend some time in different places and then write about it. And it was kind of almost pre-internet, so it was a bit kind of clunky. But it's what he was proposing, I think, from the village side is where I think we could go, which is essentially people were working like 3 hours a day, max. The focus around the community was around self-actualization, so arts, culture. People lived in very flexible situations. So, I guess polyamory, large whānau, whatever you want to talk about. So there was no kind of personal ownership, but people still lived in units of people. And of course, on the kind of, let's say, the American side, it was just kind of chaos. And it was Blade Runner 2049 type thing. But, the currency pretty much had disappeared because you didn't really need currency. You had a system where, you noted the amount of hours that you contributed, but it was all pretty much the same. It was basically just your contribution to either food production or whatever. Now, of course, these things are very difficult to do because we know what humans are like. And, of course, people are put off in some ways by visions of what could be possible. But you have to have a kind of sense of what it is you would like to see. And that's why I think you start at the basics. Well, you want some kind of personal security, financial security, financial stability, and then maybe I'll think about
other stuff.
Other stuff.
Then we're going to be surprised of the potential that it can happen.
There could be some exceptional stuff out there that people are not able to manifest because they're stuck in situations, and they might be stuck in personal situations, relationships that don't work, that they can't get out of because of financial issues that they're trapped in. Financial pressures around debt. Like levels of student debt are crazy. Yeah. And I was speaking to someone yesterday. She said she had a student debt of $75,000. I'm going, how on earth are you ever going to clear that? Because the type of stuff you're doing, which is kind of important from a human perspective, is not going to generate the amount of salary you're going to need to clear that
and live.
And you're asking people to think about, families or things like that. They're going, forget it. That's the birth rate is just going to disappear.
Yeah.
And actually that is a fundamental human thing, which is reproduction and new generations. And that's not going to stop, but it's certainly going to be a challenge. So I think we do have to kind of imagine what the future could look like without getting into sci-fi stuff, because we don't know. We always tend to think we're going to do stuff and it doesn't happen for whatever reason. But I think from a human point of view, if we don't know where we're going, we're going to end up anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely, or nowhere as well. Who knows? But I feel like the basic needs is something that we can do now to allow that exploration to unfold. To be courageous enough to tap into these places. No one wants to think about it because they're busy in surviving at the moment. I don't know what's the future. I want to eat today, and I want to pay my debt, and I want to be able to study and learn and educate. I want to be able to come back to my family not stressed from work and like, I'm so unhappy, and not having a mental well-being pandemic, basically, of stress, anxiety, which affects many of my friends in New Zealand and including myself sometimes. And I feel like, how can we actually take that as really the core change that we need to make in our society, which is the fundamental, the way we live, universal, basic income or basic needs.
Yeah, it's so critical. All the studies show that when you give people cash support that they don't have to worry about, their mental health improves. And then they put it towards that self-improvement. So they will educate themselves. They will look after their health. They will start a business. They will take a bit of risk because they can do it.
Exactly.
And all we hear is, people are going to lay about doing nothing and drink. It's bullshit.
It is bullshit.
For people who have no idea about the human condition.
Absolutely.
It's just outrageous. And if you think, actually, we do have a basic income already, and it's called superannuation.
Yeah.
For people over 65. And actually, we have fantastic outcomes for our older population because they've got that financial security. Mm-hmm. It's there. And sometimes it's very frustrating when people go, show us where it's worked. Well, it's worked here. We don't want to be the first to do something. New Zealand's been the first to do lots of things.
That's right.
Women's suffrage, for starters. Everyone thought that was a crazy idea. And nuclear free. But it's in some respects our lack of vision for the future is a failure of our imagination, and that we're captured by those noisy voices who do control a lot of the media, do have a lot of the power, are pretty much okay, Jack, and they're holding us all back. And, I say to people, it's up to you. If you want the change to happen, we can make it happen. We really can do it.
Absolutely.
We can deliver this stuff. We can deliver this stuff, in a couple of years being in government. But we need people to support it. But I just think, sometimes when I think, as you say, being a politician, it's like, oh, I'd really like to do other things. Like maybe I'd like to go and stay with my parents for a while or whatever. And or write a book or do a PhD or who knows. This is so important. It's so important that it's worth my time and energy and effort to try and at least put this there as an option for people to think about, because I think it will be powerful. It will help us realign the system, and it will just empower people to have more freedom to choose the lives they want to lead.
Have you got kids yourself?
Yeah, I've got 2 kids.
Two kids, yeah. So it's even more important for someone like yourself in a way, because they're going to grow up to that world, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're in their mid-20s, so they're kind of doing their thing, and I've been talking to them about this for years. So they kind of, yeah, Dad, totally.
Okay.
Yeah, as you do. But yeah, it's that sense of, I'm saying to them, this is your future. This is your world. I'm not going to be here forever. And, we need to set some kind of direction, but we need to set people free. I'm not worried about people who are wealthy. To be honest, they're not going to be impacted that much. House prices in New Zealand are up 500% in the last 20 years.
The highest in the world, by the way.
It's crazy. And when I talk to young people, in their 20s and 30s, they go, forget about the ones in their teens, because they've got no sense of the history. They'll be just going, oh, I'm just going to live at home, or they're saying, what do we do? So it's they're just scratching their heads and going, this is completely unfair. It doesn't make any sense. We've done what we were supposed to do. We studied, we went to university, we're getting jobs. The jobs are like, if we compare it to a house price, it might be 10 or 20 times. That's nuts.
It is nuts.
So the system has gone totally out of whack. And in some respects, it's embarrassing that people just are ignoring it.
Or accept it.
I mean, people are talking about, that accept it. And it's because, one of our biggest lenders at the moment is the Bank of Mum and Dad, over $20 billion. It's like, it's almost as big as a bank. And so it's that kind of intergenerational transfer. It's like we're living in a feudal system. And people go, so I'm thinking, that's ridiculous. I don't mind paying a bit more tax if it's going to realign the system, because I don't want my kids coming to me and say, oh, I need some money to buy a house. Here's a deposit. It just feels like, is that what we've come to? What about all those kids who can't do that? And in a way, a lot of, older people, and I say older, let's say parents, grandparents, they recognize this and they're uncomfortable about it, but they also they can't see that they can change that, and they're just going to look after their families. But they also, in the back of their minds, going, this is not what we thought we were getting. This is not what we thought we were working towards. This is not the society that we wanted to create. And somehow they have created that, and unconsciously, for sure. But it's that, because the fundamental engine, like a car, you don't see it. It's under the bonnet. You just put your foot down and it goes. But, we need to open that bonnet and go, actually, we need to rewire some of this thing.
Totally, like the human mind, like the human body. We don't know that. I wake up and it's still working. Yep. It worked last night while I was sleeping. My heart was beating, the brain was functioning, the organs were functioning. Exactly the same thing. But sometimes we do need to check it as well to find out, actually, oh, shit, I have this. I need to actually look after myself a bit better.
I mean, talk about the organ stuff. I mean, I wrote an article, I think, 10 years ago now, and I called it monetary dialysis, because I said essentially we need to bring fresh new blood into the system and get the old stuff out. We needed a kind of a transfusion, and essentially that was kind of new, fresh money, and get rid of this kind of debt over here. Otherwise, the body is going to break down, and it feels like we're on dialysis still, financial dialysis. And if we don't change that, our poor old body is just going to give up at some point. Yeah,
unfortunately, the monetary system as it is at the moment, just based on debt creation, really, rather than actually creating something as an incentive for people. Yeah. It's so. Look, we kind of in the last few moments, but I feel like After a few months that you've been doing that, is there a hope for us to make something happen in New Zealand and to reimagine things, even from the fundamental basic needs point of view, universal basic income, influence people that might be more in power to actually embrace ideas that are a bit more radical in their opinion, but currently they are on the table? And you obviously talk to people. Is there openness in our society here in New Zealand, in our community?
I think in some areas, I think sometimes we're a bit closed in our thinking. There are politicians on both sides of the house who do support this, and they're kind of saying, Raf, it's great you're out there talking about this because we can't talk about it. And I go, why can't you talk about it? Oh, well, it doesn't fit into whatever our party platform is, or people won't like it, or our donors won't like it, or whatever. So, we've got, whatever, a year and a bit to the next election. And I guess, our job is to go out there and just keep talking to people about it and raise that awareness.
Great.
And in a way that is a two-way conversation. It's not just saying this is what we have to do. It's also letting people talk about the issues that they have. And people do come and talk about it. Health, particularly, is a big problem for people. Being able to afford to live. There are so many working poor out there. They go, I'm working every hour God sends, but I still can't seem to pay my bills. And that's obviously got worse in the last year or so. So, yeah, I'm positive and I'm hopeful, I mean, I'm not a spring chicken, so I've been around. So I kind of have been through a few of these cycles, but I just think the timing is right.
I think so too. Many of us think so too.
Yeah, from a cyclical point of view, we're finishing the cycle of neoliberalism from, the mid-80s. We're in a kind of interregnum period. And people are saying, well, what's next? This is what's next.
Exactly.
And it's just trying to find the right tone, the right pitch. But nothing beats just talking to people about it. And then let them go and talk to people about it and let people come to that decision themselves. So we just have to plug away.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Nice. I'm feeling a bit more positive after talking to you. So I'm keen to kind of support whenever we can. And it's time for us to say hi. And we've been kind of together for almost an hour. I had such a pleasure having conversation with you. And to be honest, I can sit for extra few hours and continue talking about stuff like that because they really matter and they make a massive impact. But I agree with you. The time is actually now. When we do that is actually, we wouldn't have better time than actually right now. And I'm motivated for that. And people like yourself hopefully can influence within the parliament system, governance system. And I'm hoping that we're going to have more platforms that we can come together and share these discussions and be open with them and have someone contradicting them so we can actually have these discussions. Raf, thank you so much. You can check it out. I'm going to upload that podcast later on today. It's going to be on YouTube, Facebook, and all the other similar platforms as you know them. And it was a pleasure to talking to this guy. And come and check it out in live. You're going to be tonight on Ihanga.
That's right, yes.
And you're based in Wellington, so check out the Opportunity Party online. And normally you send emails as well. You can subscribe and you can be in the know when Raf is coming maybe nearby where you live. We're open to discussion. And please, if you have comments and suggestions, you know the place. So open to that as well. Lots of love and thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me in this beautiful place.
Wonderful. Nice.